Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is CF Claire. I am an aspiring writer. Primarily, I write romances, but today it's a very special episode because we're doing the third video installment of what I'm now calling my Rate My Chapter series. And we're going to be looking at my middle grade fantasy novel, Project Conjurer. So I'll put a little bit about that project on the screen. I've done this format twice before with my Project Chance, which is a contemporary shifter romance. And I really, really enjoyed doing it. So here we are again. Basically, with this format, I summarize the process of writing each chapter as well as the product of the writing. And then I give the chapter a star rating based not on the prose, but on understanding what I want the story to be and whether that chapter did what I wanted it to do. And I go into very vague about the plot and events, but very specifically, I like to talk about the process of what I think went wrong in the chapter structurally or from a writing craft perspective, or what I really liked. So the troubles, the successes, the ideas on what might have been happening. And I find that really fun. I would love to see other people doing this sort of thing. If you do, let me know. And I'll put the link in the description to the other videos I have in the previous installments of this series. I like to outline really heavily, and then I've been really enjoying fast drafting and just getting the words on the page, which means that the prose level, yeah, it's bad. It's not very fun. So part of the point of this is to help me analyze what's going on with the first draft, just in general, as well as keep a positive perspective on the writing with the project, because it can be quite a downer to spend a lot of time figuring out what you want your story to be and then writing the story, and then you read the first draft and it's just like, oh my god, this is terrible, this is bad. And we don't want to feel that way. So the purpose is to really look at it and be like, does this do, what I wanted it to do? No? Okay. What do we think went wrong then? That's fine. So if that sounds good, then just keep hanging out. We're going to get into it. We're going to take this show on the road though, because I have to go get in the pickup line to pick up my kids, and it's just time to go. So I will see you in the car. So let's talk overall stats. First of all, the story is 24 chapters. At the end of everything, it hopefully would be about 50,000 words, but there was literally no word count goal for this first draft. So it did come to 26,255 words. And I wrote 19 of those chapters, and we'll talk about why I didn't write all of them in the first draft, because that is important. And it took 15 hours and 21 minutes to write it. Each chapter has its own little name, and then 25-minute writing sprints, sometimes with like 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something like that instead. Because ideally, I don't want to be spending more than an hour on each chapter for a first draft, because I do outline so much that it really is just like get it in a prose format, because the time went in the outlining. So that's overall. The first chapter was 1 hour and 20 minutes and 2,563 words, which is quite a lot of words. The protagonist is a 12-year-old boy, and I'm not going to be hard on myself about the tone in a first draft, but like definitely this doesn't read like a 12-year-old boy. That was cute. That was cute. I can see why it was so long. There was a lot of backstory that didn't need to be there. I was kind of telling, that's something that I've noticed with this draft in particular, is that I have a lot of telling myself the story as I'm still kind of world building as I'm writing, because there's so much to do in the first draft of a fantasy novel. So definitely some of that was just me needing to figure it out on the page myself. But I think also I started a little bit before I probably should have. The reason is I was trying to have a scene where we introduce the main character and the main relationship, which is him and his 4-year-old brother. So I wanted a scene where we introduce that first and then go into what needs to be happening in the chapter. And I think it just dragged out for longer than it needed to. I had the main character having some conversation that doesn't really seem in line with what I actually want his personality to be. So it's like, what are we doing with that? I had wanted to set up the protagonist being this very popular kid in his own way. And I really like the way that came together. And I also really, really like how I set up how popular he is. And then immediately how he was really different in front of the girl that he has a crush on. And I love it's so cute. It's so cute. So I thought that went really well. I would say this is 4 stars. I feel like it did everything I wanted it to do, just it didn't do it very well. And it kind of had a little bit too much going on. The second chapter took 50 minutes to write, 50, and it was 1,688 words. This chapter definitely had less of the telling myself the world building to it, but there was still a fair amount of it. And I do like the way that a lot of the world building happened because it was happening in action through the scene of what the characters were doing. But I think there it was over explained for sure. And I think part of that was just me being like, hey, and by the way, self, this is why this is happening. There's definitely not enough conversation between the main character and his best friend. I want them to be a very, very close friendship. And I'm reading Agatha Christie right now, and part of this book is that there's a huge detective element to it. So, what I've really been enjoying about Agatha Christie is how she is so masterful with her dialogue. Now, obviously, this is a first draft, but I think taking a page from her book, so to speak, and really letting the character relationships shine through the dialogue between them would go really, really far. I also really like that this chapter sets up the main desire of the protagonist, and it's in a little bit of a clumsy way. It could definitely be introduced in a much better way. I like that it sets it up. I like that even though it does feel like it's giving too much world building, we're also kind of getting dropped in and being expected to know some stuff. The thing about the story is that it's in a dystopian fantasy world, but from the 12-year-old protagonist perspective, it's not dystopian. It is sort of utopian, and it's his own personal circumstances that are causing him stress and everything. But I really like the contradiction between his belief in this, how the world is like really pretty great except for the stuff going on in his personal life, juxtaposed with this world building stuff that to a reader is like, what the hell is going on and why is everyone fine with that? So I really like the way that that came through. The pacing really is chugging along. I had noticed that the pacing of of writing more detective sorts of stories, it's so much faster pacing wise than writing contemporary romance, which I had been kind of writing both at the same time for a little while. And I was really struggling with pacing in the contemporary romance. Meanwhile, every time I would sit down with this detective fantasy novel, I was like, holy cow, every single chapter, there is a million different things that need to happen. There is no chapter where it's just like, we could cut that. So I just thought that was very interesting, the difference in genres. This third chapter was so devastating to read. Oh my gosh. It took an hour and 3 minutes to write. It was 1,488 words. This has got to be a 5-star chapter. This does a really good job setting up the nature of the relationships that this is the first book of a trilogy. So this sets up the nature of the relationships that the protagonist is really struggling with throughout the course of the trilogy, because this series is really about that dynamic between child and parent and the difficulties of what children don't understand about parents and parents' lives, and the hardships of trying to protect your children from the world and also needing to teach them how to protect themselves from the world and interact with the world. And so it's very poignant, especially as a parent, and knowing things about, the parents and the situation that happens in this story and being like, you don't know, Henry, you just don't know. But it's his perspective. And so this really sets up the relationship between him and his father and between him and his brother, where he is just in this parent role for his 4-year-old brother and has been for most of his brother's life, while his father has just been not able to be a parent to him And I think this really well sets it up. There's a cute paragraph. Okay, so his brother is named Tad. If Tad was a tadpole, then their father was a crab. Tad never seemed to remember how much he got hurt. Henry remembered enough for both of them. Oh my god. So I really like that comparison of Tad being the tadpole and their father being a crab. Yeah, okay. So this was like a lot of setup. There's a lot of over explaining in this. There's a lot of, he wouldn't be thinking these things because this is not a new situation for him. So in the moment, things would be moving along a lot faster than this, and it's getting bogged. The prose of it is getting bogged down by all of the, internal description that should be implied or subtext or something. That's too much to ask of a first draft, right? This has the potential to really hit hard, and it explains this is right before the inciting event of the book. So this is the last bit of setup that we need for why this event is going to be important. And I really, really like the way I mirrored things. The relationship between the protagonist and his little brother, there's a recurring sort of plea of something happens and the little brother makes the protagonist promise that he won't ever leave him. And the protagonist obviously agrees and is like, oh, I will never leave you. But then at the end of the chapter, the situation mirrors itself between the protagonist and the father, where their father is about to leave. And the protagonist is like, please don't leave me. And the father does. And oh my God, it's gonna break my heart. So this is gonna be a funny video because I'm about to have to start moving in the pickup line. So we're going all over the place today. It's the next day, but let's talk about chapter 4. This chapter was 1,807 words total, but I have a note on my card that I had already written 812 of those words when I was working on the outline. So it was 987 new words, and it took 35 minutes. I liked this chapter a lot. It set up the mystery that well, I suppose there are a few mysteries. It set the threads for one of the main mysteries, and I like the way that I did that. There was a lot of there's a lot of exposition going on. Too much exposition and too much rehashing in the moment of a lot of history that like he just would not be on his mind right now. So it does feel a lot like as the writer just throwing a lot of paint on the wall kind of just so that I know what colors I want to work with, and then knowing I'll be coming in and making it actually look good. There's some elements that I introduced in this that I really like, but they're introduced very clumsily. There's an important historical character. I introduced what time of year it is, and I don't know if I want to keep that time of year. Oh, I do like the way that I introduced. So there's an object that the protagonist finds in this chapter. This chapter did a really good job introducing the theme, or not the theme, but the major value that this trilogy is focused on, or at least this first book. So I would say this is a 5-star chapter. Chapter 5 was 1,435 words, took 52 minutes, and it was pretty good. Just a lot of the same exposition, explaining too much, doesn't sound like a child narrator. But I think it did what I wanted it to do, and I really like the way that I have another character in this chapter. I like the way that I set up a certain plot thread that is going on with them. So yeah, I would say 4 stars. Chapter 6 was 1,821 words, took 1 hour to write, and it is doing some heavy lifting. Overall, I think it did a good job. It was kind of a bridge between two different sort of sections that were going on. So it's definitely pretty rough how that all played out. It's very noticeable beginning in this chapter that the little brother character, the 4-year-old, is just like not around right now. And he really should be. Like, there's no reason that makes any sense that he's not around. And I knew as I was writing it, I was like, where is this kid? Like, he would be here, wouldn't he? But what I had plotted out didn't really make sense. But as I was writing, it felt like he was doing something else. So I decided not to get too caught up in that. This story is going to be like an onion where I keep coming back and doing layers. So there'll be a layer that's just about where is the little brother and just beefing up the relationship there, because that is supposed to be one of the core things about this story. In at least half the book, it's like, where is this kid? But there was another character that I had not planned to have in the book, and it just turned out that as I was writing the scene, I was like, I think there'd be a couple other people here, and I think there's this person, and I think they're like this, and actually I really like that, and I think they just said something that's a good metaphor for what's going on. So that was pretty fun. And there's another subplot that is very clumsily set up. I knew, so there's someone who needs to act in a certain way because of something that's going on in a subplot. And I hadn't really nailed down what exactly they were doing or what it was going to be like as they were doing it. So that just doesn't make sense. But it does need to happen because of the stuff that I know is going on that the main character doesn't know about. So I would say 4 stars, but yes, quite clumsy. Then so at the end of that chapter, there is a revelation that happens that really sets the main mystery. Previously, we'd set up the main mystery, but the protagonist didn't know. Now, the protagonist knows about the main mystery. So we're in the meat of what the story's going to be. Chapters 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, 5 chapters, all have to deal with what is the protagonist doing about the mystery he just discovered? What are the actions he's taking? This is like the classic detective part of the story. And I knew that I didn't know enough about mystery stories for how I wanted this to go out to even attempt, because there was just too much other stuff that I was keeping in my head at that time. So I was like, I just need to do the rest of the plot. And I know generally, like, this is the section where he's going to be looking for clues and interrogating people and trying to find the answers. But there's more plot stuff that just happens. And I need to just write that. So I skipped all 5 of those chapters, knowing I was going to come back to it when I knew the world a little better, when I had a better grasp of what I wanted to do, because this is also the section of the book where I'm setting up a lot of the relationships that the protagonist has with people in this small village that he's grown up. And it's setting the stakes for what he's going to be risking losing as we go further in the books. So I did figure it would just be easier to come back to that. So that's why this first draft is 19 chapters instead of 24. And I use the 8 sequence method when I'm outlining. So that's why I know how many chapters there's going to be and where the chapters are missing. And it's not just like a mystery, because all the chapters are going to be about the same amount of words. It's going to come to about 50,000 words total. There's 24 chapters total, which means each chapter is like close to 2,000 words. And I know what the plot beats and scenes are for various parts of the novel, so I know exactly where, where the pieces are missing. Anyways, so that's what's going on there. So the next chapter to look at is going to be chapter 12. Chapter 12 was a funny one. It was 587 words that I had written when I was doing the outline. So I didn't actually write any of it when I sat down to do the draft. I just copy pasted because that amount of words did what I needed the chapter to do. So what this chapter is it's where he learns something very important to both the trilogy's overall plot as well as the plot of the main mystery, what he's trying to do. So it's a really, really big clue. And he gets it through this classroom setting. There are a lot more words that need to be used to convey this information, but this was the bare bones of it. The relationship the protagonist has with the like professor, teacher person at the school is really important. And it's not set up well in this chapter. So I would say this is probably, what would I rate this? Yeah, I would say 3 stars, because it is doing what it needs to do, but it's really not doing it in that well of a way. It's very, here's complete info dump. So that's okay. But yeah, I'm not going to give it 4 stars for that. And again, in this chapter, it's like, where is his best friend? Where is his crush? Where are the other major characters in the story? They're not here. Chapter 13 was 1,166 words. It took 40 minutes to write. I would say this is a 4-star chapter. The bulk of it has to do with reaction and relationships between him and the protagonist and his best friend as they kind of piece together an idea about this information they learned in the last chapter. And I think that's really good and necessary. And then it ends in an escalation of events in the town, and I love that. There are some issues. I don't know what this statue is, but there's some sort of statue that has a huge importance to the people of the village, and I need to know more about it. It comes up a couple times, and it's a recurring element that needs to. I need to know what it is because it's supposed to have a lot of weight to it. So who knows? Yeah. So this is the chapter where new people come to town and there are suddenly world stakes that are about to take over and make it impossible to do anything more with the mystery he's trying to do. So this is where we go more from the detective genre style into fantasy. There's a funny balance going on where there's kind of too much world building a lot of times, and other times it's like, oh, this thing called just by name is happening, and then I never actually further talk more about it. So obviously, we gotta fix that. So yeah, I would say 4 stars because of the relationship building and the elements that I need to be in there are all in there. Chapter 14, this is very short, 688 words, took 25 minutes. This chapter is really a reactive chapter, and it's really clear here that one of the characters who's a major player behind the scenes, that I don't know exactly what their course of action is, because they're reacting in this chapter, but they're not reacting in the way that I think they actually would be. I think they would be doing quite different stuff, and their manner would be very different. So that's a pretty big problem. Ultimately, the end goal is the same. There's a larger conflict going on outside the confines of this village, and I don't exactly know what it is. I just know that I need it to be going on, and it's one of the big factors for why everything is the way it is and why events happen. So it'll probably be pretty good to figure that out because there are characters who live in the village who do know, and the actions they take are because of that knowledge, and so that will be, yeah, good to know. This book is very complicated because for me as a writer, as a reader, it's probably not. But for me as a writer, because there are at least 5 people who have knowledge the protagonist does not have. And they're all doing things actively as he is trying to find out what is going on. So it's difficult to all the threads. I was really having a hard time keeping it in an outline format and really getting it clear. So I knew as I was writing it that part of writing it was to just get space in my head so that I could, you know, get these threads straightened out. And it's clear that they do need to be straightened out. But I would say 3 stars because it does function to do what I need it to do, but it does not do it in a very good way or in a way that is close to what I want from the book in the end. Chapter 15 was 1,708 words. It took an hour and 10 minutes to write. This chapter had to do so much. There's so much information and plot progression happening in this chapter. So, for that, I think I'm going to give this a 5 stars. I like the interaction between the protagonist and the other characters in this scene. There are some clumsily set up things with his character arc, but they are there. And we get the information that we need to learn from this. And I do like the method it's delivered in, even though it's very clumsy. At this point of the book is where I'd rather a lot of the backstory stuff start coming in because it would make a lot more sense at this point. And it's very backloaded on backstory stuff. Chapter 16, 1,437 words, 1 hour and 2 minutes. This chapter, again, has a lot of work to do. They're in a new location. It's a new setup of this new situation that's going on after an escalation that just happened in the last chapter. And I think I think it's good. This is where there are friend characters that should have been previously set up in those chapters I didn't write yet to make it hit a lot different, a lot better at this point. So, particularly one of them should be really set up well. And there's an idea floating around that keeps coming up that is the correct idea of what the government is doing with this certain thing that they're doing. And it's so on the nose, and it's like, oh, okay, this has come up every chapter for like the last three chapters. Definitely that shouldn't be happening. And probably there should be a couple other ideas of why the government's doing this or that. But anyways, it's the first draft. So I will say 4 stars because it does get us where we need to go. And it's doing so much. Gosh. That's another day. I don't have my stats in front of me for chapter 17, so I'll just put it on the screen, whatever they are. So at this point of the book, there's so much plot that is happening in every chapter. So every chapter is doing so much work. This chapter, I think, did a really good job of setting up and describing the situation that happens that ultimately makes the protagonist make this character defining choice that he wouldn't have made at the beginning of the story. So I think that's really good. There's a character involved in that situation who is one of the primary secondary characters, and the actions that that character takes, I know they have to take those actions. I know I want them to do that, but I don't have a good grasp on their motivation for why they're doing it and why they think that's going to achieve what they need to achieve. So I think there's definitely a better way. If I had a better understanding of that, I think I could have relayed that through the scene better. I also don't have a great grasp on what tactics this government would take when this situation arises. So I feel like that felt pretty weak. This is another situation where there's a lot of vagueness on some world building things that are just thrown out there as, oh, this thing. It's like we're supposed to know what that is at this point for sure. It's because once you say that one thing, it's supposed to hit in this really deep way. And we don't know what the hell that is.
And there's a certain group of people that hadn't been mentioned at all up to this point, and suddenly it's really important that we understand what they are, and they have this mantra that's associated with them, and a character says the mantra, and we're supposed to feel it like, holy cow, what is going on? Because we're supposed to instantly make that connection, and we don't know anything about this. The first time we're hearing anything about it. And it's a little tricky because the protagonist isn't part of this situation. He is watching it unfold and he has no clear thing that he can do to stop it. So he's in a powerless sort of situation right now. And it's because of that that he will then make the decision that he makes at the end of the chapter to do this new course of action. So we needed him to do that. This chapter's doing everything I need it to do. Definitely some good notes for things that need to be improved upon, but I will give it 4 stars. It's doing a lot, and I think it's doing it in a pretty good way for what you can expect from a first draft.
It's another day. Chapter 18 was 1,683 words. It took 1 hour and 5 minutes to write. And like all the chapters at the end of the book, it has so much it is doing. There are like 4 different plot things that it's doing in this one chapter, at least. It's not doing any of them very well, but it is doing them. There are some very poor logistics at the start of this chapter. I have no idea if the plan that these kids have is at all possible, but the beginning has to do with a lot of logistics of what they're doing. There's a decision they make that I don't know if that makes any sense that they would make that decision. To make it all work, I need the protagonist to leave the place that he is in order to do something else so that he can find something else that is not in the location that he had been in. But it also doesn't really make sense for him to be the only one to leave it. So, like, that's what I have right now in the first draft. But does it make any sense that just everyone who's supposed to be inevitably doing the thing that they're all trying to do, why wouldn't they just go with him then? Like, what are we doing? So it's kind of confusing, but I need him to be over there, and it's much better if he's alone. So, and then we've got just some not very 12-year-old feeling interiority. And then at the end of the chapter, it's just like, bam, 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 bam. This is a very over dramatic reaction to something. And that doesn't feel like it's supported by what we had heard before. And what's going on here? And then just suddenly, this is happening? What? And it all kind of like does work, but it's so rough. I'm going to give this chapter 3 stars. There are some things that I may need to change, but it is doing everything that I need it to do to make the plot work how I want it to work. But some of the pieces are weak. Yeah, 3 stars. Chapter 19 was 1,426 words. It took 50 minutes. There's an element that has supposed to have been being gradually built from the very beginning of the book, and it's supposed to, at this point, really have become prominent, and it's absolutely missing. But in this chapter, we're supposed to be suspecting that this element is happening in some way, and it's just nowhere. But in the chapter, I'm like, oh, this thing that's coming out of nowhere. So that's not very good. And then just a lot of reaction. I don't know how. I mean, it's a first draft, but if we're thinking of the ratio of action to reaction, this chapter's mostly reaction in a way that slows down the pacing. And I want it to be really going, going, going. And I don't want him to have so much time to feel like he can just react because we're really getting to the end here. So he had to have been on his own in order to have this encounter that he's having and make it the way that I want it to be. But at the same time, like, why? How do we justify that? Because it doesn't really make sense that he wouldn't be with everyone else. There's another character, one of the characters who has been very active this whole time in a way that the protagonist doesn't know about. They're actively doing something right now, and they intercept the protagonist. And I have no idea what they're doing. I'm just vaguely some sort of here's this setup that's going on. And I really need to know what the heck they're doing. Again, there's this assumption in this chapter of, oh, this thing, and this is another thing. And it's just like, oh, that's not been set up at all. No one knows what that means. So, this is where the main mystery comes back in and it just kind of merges into one with the fantasy plot. And so we get this confrontation about it. It's an accusation that the chapter ends on. And I think that works really well, but it's not supported well at all. There are supposed to be clues and also red herrings, and there's just kind of nothing. So you know. So I would give this chapter probably 3 stars as well. I think it does what I needed to do, but I have concerns that it's maybe there's a better way to do it and it's not doing what it's doing particularly well. Chapter 20 was 889 words. It took 35 minutes to write. I think this chapter is good. It had a major action that centers the chapter, and there's a major revelation that is sort of coming implied. So the main problem is that there's a confrontation between the protagonist and some other character, and the other character is someone who should be actively trying to do something and feeling pretty at their wits end, and they're really have the stakes are super high for them, and the protagonist is reacting in this very emotional way to things that he's learned. The character that he's trying to confront and interact with is basically, I mean, all of their conversation dialogue stuff is so weak. It's just like, "Oh, we don't have time for this. We don't have time for this." Just like, what are you trying to do, you know? I don't have that anywhere. It's very, So that's the biggest weakness for sure. Also, though, again, we're supposed to have knowledge of of a certain way that this kind of magic works, and it's supposed to have been built up into this thing that the protagonist has very strong feelings about. and we never learned anything about it. And and so all of a sudden it's just like, oh, here's the thing that's he thinks is happening and all the reasons why that's bad. And I need to have a better understanding of the actual magic system because I know the branches of magic that I want and I know which characters have which magic, but I don't necessarily know what they're doing with that or how that interacts with the world. So, and that is kind of crucial to the plot. So, I would say 4 stars. I think it did a pretty good job. There's a lot of tidying up of foreshadowing stuff to add in, strengthening what one of these characters' motivations is and what their actual plan is, how they interact with the protagonist. But overall, everything's basically there. Chapter 21 was 641 words and it took 30 minutes. I really like this chapter. It's obviously super short. Again, there's some reaction from characters where I don't necessarily know what they would be trying to do and they feel very ineffective right now. So definitely need to figure that out. But we also get some answers. I like the name of this chapter. I call this chapter The Truth Hurts. And we learn a really big piece of information. A few big pieces of information, but like a really big piece of information. But at the same time, it's we're supposed to have set up an expectation throughout the course of the book that we didn't set up at all. And then when we learn this revelation, it's going to make that expectation, uh, it's going to twist that expectation in a certain way. It's supposed to be this moment of, what? Oh my God. The way that I've set up all these chapters, I was really trying to draw from that sort of every single chapter, there's some sort of revelation that's happening to kind of really pull you through each chapter. And funnily enough, there's very few lines of prose that I like from this first draft, which makes sense. But this chapter has this singular line that I think is really, really good for this one character. So I love that. I'm going to give this chapter 4 stars. I think the only reason I wouldn't give it 5 stars is because it's not very fleshed out. And I don't know exactly what that other character's plan is. So 4 stars. Chapter 22 was 1,143 words. It took 49 minutes. This chapter rules. I love this chapter. This is 5 stars for sure. This chapter does so much. There are only 2 chapters left after this. This is where everything really comes to a head. And pretty much all of the revelations have happened. And then there's going to be the character decisions that they wouldn't have made earlier in the book. So this is a really big realization scene for the protagonist, and I think it's super on the nose. It's super on the nose. So obviously that we don't want to actually leave it like that. But the theme really comes home in this chapter. The theme is stated in a way that I think is not preachy and makes sense that the protagonist would have come to this conclusion because of circumstances and all of this stuff. And again, we have another thing that is supposed to have been set up. This is like the 10th thing that is supposed to have been set up. There's so much that was supposed to be set up that I just didn't. And then I was like, wow, oh my God, the thing is happening. What? So we're supposed to understand what this thing means. And we have a tying up of a thread. We got the major mystery, we got a resolution from that a few chapters ago. And then right here, we get a resolution from sort of the secondary main mystery in this really rad way. So the big problem with this chapter is all the characters besides the protagonist, I don't know why they're doing what they're doing. I just know that I need them to be doing it. So it's not supported well of why they're there, but I need them to be there. And yeah, I really like the way that the protagonist takes charge at the end. He's got his own plan, and we don't see what the plan is because it's going to work, or at least to a certain extent, it's going to work. And I love that it involves this callback to a game that all the kids in the village played back at the beginning of the book, and they're going to use that in order to do the thing that they're trying to do. And it's really cute of this middle grade fantasy story where the kids beat the bad guys using a kid game in a different way. And I don't know what the hell the game is or how you play it, but whatever the logistics are of how I need them to defeat the bad guys, it's going to involve that's how you play the game. And this is also where one of the primary and secondary characters gets to step up and have their character arc where they will make a decision to do something that they would not have done before the events of the book. So that feels really, really good. 5 stars. Chapter 23 was 1,514 words, took 50 minutes. This chapter is a lot of fun. So there's the next chapter is the last chapter. This chapter is so nice. It's so clunky. This is where we see the first step of the protagonist's plan of what they're going to do to fix the situation that they're in. And it involves him giving this speech. And he doesn't know it, and we don't know it. I know it as the writer, that he's acting in this moment exactly like his father has acted at different times in his father's life. And Henry's going to learn about that in the second book, and it's going to make you feel things when you think back to how he acts here. So it's set up so well right now. His speech is very clunky. I have it that all the kids of the village just come out at this certain signal, and it's like, why would kids just be coming out right away in the early hours of the morning and the parents aren't? What's going on there? Who knows? We've had a progression of the relationship between him and his crush, and I really like the interactions there. And we get to see some magic taking place in this really neat way. We get kind of an answer to a mystery that had been set up about a location. And so we get sort of an answer about that mystery as well as a further mystery about, oh, but what's this going on about that thing? So that's really fun. Yeah, I think it's really good. 5 stars. Chapter 24. 1,230 words, took 40 minutes. It's the last chapter. It's rough. It's rough, but it's fun. I like it. It's weak, but I like the way that it ends. It sets up a situation that's very poignant, that is one of the major things that the protagonist needs to deal with in the second book. So I really, really like that. We didn't fully set up that thing, and so that would be good to set up so that we really, really feel it and we can empathize with Henry as he's going through feeling it all through the next book. We get a resolution with one of the main antagonists of the story, which is great. We learn something revealing about it that's satisfying. And the other antagonist, we get they're defeated for now at least, which is good. And so things are moving. Lots of pieces that I don't know the logistics of, doesn't really make sense. Just kind of was like, it works because it has to inevitably work. But yeah, so rough. I'm going to say 4 stars. You say 4 stars. Yeah, a lot of things that need to be set up, motivations that need to be looked at, actions that don't necessarily make sense. But all in all, it leads to all the things that I wanted to happen. So, oh my gosh, I feel good about that. So, overall, I feel like it was great as a first draft. I'm really glad I didn't write those chapters that I skipped over. All of those chapters, that's where all of this stuff where I'm like, I never set up this stuff. I mean, hi, that's where they should be. I'm so excited. If I was reading this on just like how do I feel about it on a prose level? I mean, 1 star, it's terrible, right? But if I'm reading it on a structural level, I would say overall probably 3 stars, which I think is really good for a first draft of what I consider, for me and my skill level, extremely complicated. And I feel like there's not too many things in the story that I need to completely take out, which is a huge win for me. There's a lot of space to add in and specify, and there's a lot of opportunities to clarify and strengthen motives, decisions, desires, and all of the dialogue. It can only get better from here. So I think that gave me a really good blueprint to work off of. And I don't think that I could have done a much better job without getting a first draft onto paper because there were so many pieces to keep in my mind, even as someone who really enjoys outlining and I outline quite a lot. There's a certain point where it's just like, oh my gosh, this is 100 million things. So yeah, this was very fun. I hope it was a fun time to come along and see how this draft went. I really don't write middle grade fantasy. This is so different for me. But yeah, there's some fun aspects to it. And I love the melding of the mystery with the fantasy, even though I'm super intimidated by the mystery elements. And I feel like I it's just so out of my wheelhouse. So I feel like it's the kind of thing I would do so many passes of going back through the manuscript, and one at least one or two of the passes would be like setting up the mystery. Anyways, the kids just got back from school. I'm gonna go say hi to them. I hope your writing's going great, and I'll see you in the next video.